James Lucier is founding partner of Capital Alpha. He says the U.S. economy is like a muscle car, but because of tariffs, Trump is driving with the parking brake engaged. I want him to lay that out for us. James joins us now. It is so good to have you. Happy almost New Year. What do you mean the U.S. economy is like a muscle car, but because of the president and because of tariffs in particular, that the president is driving with the parking brake engaged with? Anybody who's ever done that, I've done it. It's not really great.
No, it's not. And that's President Trump's trouble right now. We have an economy with good fundamentals in many ways, and we just passed a bodaciously big tax cut bill that should be fiscal turbocharge. That should be very powerful investment stimulus to build a new factory and write it all off the same year, to get 100% expensing, to get all those other wonderful tax breaks. So people expected the first term of Trump to be like the first or second years of the last Trump administration, where all of the stimulus drove the economy. It drove wage growth, it drove hiring, it drove opportunity, and it drove money that went straight into the middle class and most especially the working class. Right now, we have an economy that feels great to people like you and me. There's an AI boom going on. But because of the tariffs, we're not seeing that sense of good feeling go to Main Street. And the reason why is that smaller businesses don't know how to invest because of the tariffs. They don't know when the tariffs will hit. And, so that's cutting into capital investment. And they're also not hiring and increasing wages the way they did after we cut the corporate tax rate by 8 points. So people expected more of Trump 1. They expected more jobs, more wage growth. And what they're seeing is not as many jobs and not a lot of wage growth, and cost of living that remains very sticky and very high. So this sense of foreboding is there. Why do we have such terrible consumer sentiment right now at a time when the economy seems to be so well for many of the better off? And the fact is, people are just worried about whether or not they can keep pace with inflation and whether or not they're really making enough to overcome these higher costs of living that we've seen in the past few years.
I love that you go there because it kind of disturbs me that we have a fair amount of guests who come on, and I understand market momentum and certainly the higher income strata feeling much more confident because they've seen wealth creation this year, as we've seen gains in the stock market, or if they own a home, and so on and so forth. But there is that lower rung of our economy, of that K-shaped economy, that is struggling. When does that become problematic for a country, for an economy? Are we already starting to see some signs of it?
Well, I would argue that it's not the bottom half. It's more like the bottom two-thirds, the bottom four-fifths. The problem we have here is that people knew a gigantic stimulative tax cut was coming at the end of the year. They knew deregulation was coming. But we also had the long, long tariff story where you announced gigantic tariffs in April, and then turns out by August they're not going to be as bad as we thought. But companies have been standing still and not taking advantage of the positive climate, waiting for those tariffs. They also stockpiled and tried to get all of their orders in to avoid the tariffs. Now they're coming into next year. We've been through the Christmas season. The Christmas inventory is gone. Most serious economists will tell you that the real impact of the tariffs to consumers was never going to be right away in August 1. It was going to be basically first and second quarter next year. And that's the problem. The tariffs have been a deterrent because they froze investors. They froze small to medium-sized businesses that were hiring. They are flowing through the system. The big retailers have held off on price increases as long as they could using the old stock.
Yeah.
But next year, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult to maintain the idea that tariffs don't have any impact, because they do.
James, do you anticipate that the Supreme Court is ultimately going to overturn President Trump's tariffs? We had a guest yesterday who said that will be a gift to U.S. consumers in the amount of about $1,800 a year. I don't want to get the devil's in the details on that, but do you anticipate that there will be pushback on what is really kind of a main strategy for President Trump?
Well, I think the Supreme Court is likely to strike down all or part of the tariffs. You may recall there are two aspects of his tariffs using emergency economic powers. One of them was the gigantic tariffs we imposed primarily on China to stop their fentanyl trade. That was a sort of a national security type tariff. And then you've got the so-called reciprocal tariffs that are supposed to be addressing a dangerous trade imbalance. I think there's actually a very good chance that the Supreme Court will strike down both of those. I think some of the more conservative members of the court are worried that by limiting the president's authority here, even if they don't agree with what he's doing, that they may inadvertently limit his options in some future situation. But the writing does seem to be on the wall if you listen to the oral arguments carefully. The only one of the 9 Supreme Court justices who seemed even remotely receptive to the tariffs was no. Thomas and Gorsuch were a little ambivalent, but there seems to be at least a solid 5, if not 6 votes to strike down the tariffs. And we'd expect it soon. We don't have a deadline, but 60 days from oral arguments on November 5th would give us first week in January.
Yeah.
I'd expect it about then.
Hey, James, one thing I do wonder, I heard somebody, it might have been on surveillance this morning on Bloomberg, who basically said, listen, President Trump was a lame duck once he was reelected and began his second term. Do you agree with that? Or do you think we could see some significant policies out of the president and the White House in the new year? Or do you expect to see a Congress that kind of comes back to life?
Well, I don't expect Congress to come back to life. No, not at all. Think about Trump time. Everything is accelerated on a massive level. And here with President Trump, you've had an incredibly fast-paced first year, Trump boom, almost a honeymoon for the first year. And I would argue that we're at that peak Trump phase. And it's going to be very important for Trump to focus on cost of living and getting an economic message that works and showing actual results before the middle of next year, or we're going to be heading toward a bloodbath for Trump and the Republicans in the midterms. So we go from peak Trump to trough Trump. But what we often see in a presidential administration is that the first year, year and a half or so going into the midterms is all about domestic policy.
Right.
And then especially with a second term president, a lame duck president, it's all foreign policy all the time as if Congress doesn't exist.
Well,
And guess
is that
what
kind
we're seeing? We're seeing it ahead of schedule.
Well, that's what
We are seeing lame duck behavior.
I love that you went there. We have about a minute left here. You're right. We've seen, as I kicked off the introduction to you, a flurry of diplomatic activity. The Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, stuff going on in Venezuela, serious. Just got about a minute left here. Your thoughts on, is that what we continue to see this year and for the rest of his administration in a big way?
I think so. At Capital Alpha, we don't expect a breakthrough in Ukraine, but Byron Callan, our expert strategist there, does think that we might see some sort of resolution by mid-year. Most people don't understand the economic situation that Russia's in. They just think of the Ukraine war as some sort of trench warfare, and everything is frozen a la World War I. Nothing could be further than the truth. The Ukrainians have been on a campaign for months now of deep strikes, taking out Russian munitions factories, Russian energy infrastructure, Russian export terminals, Russian oil refineries. I mean, the Russians are really hurting, so there could be big moves there.
Yeah.
We've Trump planning to go or hoping to go to China in April, and that makes me wonder, is he gonna, be nice to President Xi the way he's been so nice to President Putin in hopes of getting a deal when he goes to China?
Well,
I mean, that's Trump style.